Chapter 6. Irene the Sly, Chapter 2. Finding the torch inside the sewer entrance was more tedious than Irene expected, but in good time she had it. Near it she found a pair of smooth-feeling jagged rocks. She had a hunch of what they were and began to strike them together. In the pitch black she missed her first few strikes, feeling awkward for it even though it was just her around. But when she finally hit the small stones together, sparks flew out and she saw briefly for a moment their lime green color. Indeed, as she had believed, the rocks were flint stones, designed to light fires for those who were not a magister. She remembered her father teaching her a little about them before he died, that's how she knew what they were. With the torch lit she made her way through the sewers. Elia was right, they were not very complex, but they were long. As simple as they were though, Irene did have some trouble finding the access path to the sorcery district. All the other paths led back into the slums or into the structure district, but only the one led into the sorcery district. To her dismay, the path just so happened to put her into the only back road right next to the bridge gate. It was past the bridge, and indeed in the sorcery district, but at night it was well guarded, and if she walked out there with a torch she would be spotted right away and questioned by the guards. Her best chance was to come back tomorrow afternoon and sneak into the street when there was a heavy traffic of people crossing the bridge into and out of the sorcery district. For the time though, she turned around and went to her former homestead and slept. The next day she went straight for the sorcery district and waited as far back in the back road as she could, while watching for a crowd large enough to pass through the bridge gate, so she may slip in with them. That day proved fruitless and she had to leave before dusk to get herself some food. The next couple days proved just as futile as the first time she went, but she had been smart about it now and acquired herself some bread to eat throughout the day while she waited. On the sixth day she finally caught her break, as the traffic of people on the bridge entering into the sorcery district influxed greatly. Quickly and quietly she snuck into the crowd, walking as if she belonged there with them. She was not noticed by the guards at the gate, but as she went further into the district the crowd rapidly thinned out until she had to walk on her own. At least now she was in, but the hardest had yet to come. Now that she was alone, and had time to notice and enjoy the scenery, Irene was overwhelmed. She had never seen anything like the sorcery district. The very streets beneath her feet were paved with bricks instead of compact dirt or simple gravel. The houses and shops were made of a strong wood and looked beautiful in comparison to the clay buildings in the other districts. And as she went she could even spot a few larger buildings that had a peculiar lime color to them, which made them all the more exotic to her. She kept heading north through the district, trying to stay within the center of it as much as she could until she found the great white stone temple. The temple's design was so simple, square-shaped, yet it was so beautiful to Irene. The white stone walls reached near 30 feet in the air. It had its own little garden in front of it too, with a fountain and statues depicting some sort of female goddess. Irene had never been one to believe in the gods, but she heard talk about them from the people in the structure district near every day she was there. Inside the temple was warm and well lit with natural lighting. It had more statues of the goddess in there, far back at the end, and rows of benches for people to sit down in and pray. Only a few scattered people sat in the benches, and a single elder man in a clean white robe was on his knees in front of the great statue at the end. Carefully Irene looked around the temple, trying to be inconspicuous as possible, searching for an extra door that might not belong in there. But to her dismay there were only 3 doors in the entire temple, the first being the entrance and exit into the temple, and the other 2 leading into a small office stacked with books or papers about. Was she in the right temple, she thought to herself. Elia had said there were 2, but she was sure that this was the center temple. She began to give up hope and walked to the end of the bench row and sat in one. What if all of this was nothing more than misinformation? Elia never stated his source. Maybe the passage underground requires a secret phrase, a magical one. Was that the final piece Elia needed to enter the vault? Irene stood up ready to turn and go when she spotted the 2 men in armor, guards no doubt, walking towards her. She quickly sat back down and lowered her head. Fortunately they were going to the center aisle to leave. She stood back up to leave once more until the realization dawned on her, where did those 2 guards come from? She turned back around. They certainly came from near the statue, but there were no doors around there. Were they also magisters? She had never seen magic at hand, so she didn't know what sort of powers it was capable of, or the people wielding it. Perhaps there was a secret door over there, hidden by a veil of magic. She wouldn't know until she got a closer look at least. Carefully Irene crept past the man in white robes, still kneeling down at the statue's foot, and she searched for anything out of the ordinary. She found nothing that she could see but pressed further onto the walls and felt around them, tapping lightly to listen for an echo. She put her ear to the wall to hear, and that's when she saw it. Hidden so well, but not with magic, instead with simple perspective misguidance, a narrow set of parallel stairs behind the statue leading down into some sort of tunnel. Irene looked about her to make sure everyone still had their heads down in prayer. They did, and she proceeded down the stairs into the dim tunnel. The path below was straight but kept leading her deeper underground as more and more paths opened up, all of them descending stairs into the same looking passage but further down. Was this a maze, or were these paths all eventually leading to the same destination? To her the time to think was over now as she heard loud footsteps coming from higher up slowly descending. She had to keep moving. The footsteps grew louder and started getting closer faster. Irene picked up her pace. The footsteps seemed to pick up too as they followed more swiftly. She started running now, until she got to another set of descending stairs and tripped, falling down them in a loud and painful manner. She got to her feet, nothing was sprained or broken fortunately, but still she hurt all over. "Slum rats don't belong down here," a strong voice whispered from behind her. Her heart stopped and she turned around to see a bulky guard staring down at her coldly. She said nothing and turned to run, but the guard was faster than she expected and snatched her arm before she could get away. He picked her up under her shoulders, putting her face to his level, and asked, "What are you doing down here, rat? You know I could smell you from the entrance to these passages. It's how I found you so easily." Irene turned away and still said nothing. She was too scared. The man continued, "You're here to steal from the vault, aren't you?" When she didn't answer this time, he shook her violently and she started to cry a little and let out a low squeak for an answer. She quickly found her voice though before he could shake her again and said, "Why yes sir." The man put her down but didn't let go of her. "You're rather good for a slum rat to get this far, all on your own." "Yes," she answered, losing her stutter and starting to wonder why the guard hadn't killed her just yet. "How did you get in here, through the sewers?" "Yes, that's the only other way into the sorcery district aside from the bridge." Out of a strange feeling of certainty, Irene said, "You were expecting someone from the sewers to come here?" The guard crooked a wicked smile and said, I was expecting 3 someones to come here until I took care of them. So behold my surprise when I find a 4th someone." The guard was silent in thought, deciding what to do with her now, when a voice shouted from down the passage and a pair of guards appeared from around the corner, swords in hand. "Who goes there?" they demanded to know. The guard kneeled down and whispered in Irene's ear swiftly, "Be quiet and do as I say or I'll kill you, and don't run either." Then he let go of her and held out a hand saying, "Easy pals, it's just me." The other 2 guards studied him for a moment, then relaxed and sheathed their swords. "Kale, who is that with you? She smells like the sewers," one of the guards asked. "This here is my daughter Mora," Kale said. "Other kids been picking on her a lot recently and decided to pour rancid stench water all over her today. I'm sorry for the disruption. I told her to come find me should they ever pick on her again. Those Magister kids can be real cruel to non-magic people, and since they don't dare to target us directly, they go after our kids. My son Travis got his hair lit on fire by some of them little pricks." "I remember Travis, he's a tough lad. Bet he paid them back in full?" Kale asked. "Indeed he did, broke one of the other kids' arms and knocked a few teeth out from the one who cast the spell." The guards had a laugh. Kale then turned and grabbed Irene's hand. "All right, I got to get this one home and cleaned up. You think you can cover me for the rest of the day, Samuel? I would really owe you one." The guard, Samuel, said yes, and Kale led Irene out of the temple and back to his small home. She could see Kale better now that they were far out of the dark tunnels under the temple. He was an average-sized man, height and build, a stern face and to Irene unattractive. His hair was short-trimmed and dark like a raven. After shutting the door and pulling out a tin tub, Kale demanded she undress as he grabbed some rags. He filled the tub with water and looked over to Irene, who was still fully dressed. "I told you to remove your cloths," Kale said, irritated. Irene took a step back and put her arms close to her chest defensively. Kale walked up to her and grabbed her arms, pulling them to her sides, and started to remove the clothes against her will. She struggled violently and Kale shoved her against the wall, pinning her there with a single hand like she was a straw doll. Kale pulled out a large knife and put it close to her face so she could see it clearly. She turned away and he said, "This blade is very sharp. If you struggle you're going to get hurt very badly, understand?" Irene nodded and Kale started cutting her clothes off. She sobbed quietly to herself. When Kale was finished, he wiped the tears off her face and said, "Don't do that. I'm not some pervert who's interested in violating children, especially a sewer rat.
Now get in the tub, and if you come out of it before you're done I will hurt you.
Still afraid of what Kale might do, Irene moved very slowly to the tub, crossing her arms over her chest as she was now very cold. She stepped into the tub, the water was even colder than she anticipated, and slowly sat down in it, shivering right away. Once she was all the way in, Kale dropped a small round pink stone of sorts into the tub with her. As soon as it hit the water it began to fizzle and bubbles rapidly filled the entire tub, consuming her. Startled, she jumped to her feet and tried to dash out of the bath, but Kale was expecting this and swiftly placed his hands on her shoulders and pushed her back into it.
Relax, relax, he said. It's a soap marble, it won't hurt you, you need to be cleaned up, so just soak in there for a while.
Realizing Kale was right, Irene settled back into the tub. It was still freezing to her, but the soap at least smelled very nice. After a minute she started to sneeze uncontrollably, and Kale sighed, then grabbed another small marble, a red one this time, and dropped it into the tub. It fizzled inside just like the previous one, but kept fizzling, making the water shift around Irene a lot. Within moments the cold waters of the tub warmed up and was now steaming. The sensation was incredible, and Irene found herself easily relaxing in the tub now. She never before had a hot bath.
Tilt your head back into the water, I need to wash your hair now,
Kale said, reminding Irene of his presence. She was glad the bubbles had filled the top of the tub and covered her naked body, but still she felt uncomfortable at the fact he was there. Irene did as he said, and Kale put a few rags into the tub with her. As they absorbed the water and sunk to the bottom, he put a hand under her head and gently started combing her hair with a brush. The process took him a while, for every time he ran into a knot in her hair he had to stop and undo it with both hands. Finally he straightened her hair out and combed out most of the dirt and grime along the way.
Use some of the rags in the tub to clean your face and body, Kale said.
He then left and grabbed a small bucket filled with water and dropped yet another strange marble into it.
Keep your head up and out of the water now, I need to clean your hair.
Irene did as he said, and he put his hands into the small bucket and lathered her hair with the soap inside. After a few moments it started to burn and she had to resist dunking her head into the water.
It burns,
Irene said, trying to sound as weak as she could.
And it will keep burning for a few more minutes, Kale said. It's killing off all the lice and other germs on your scalp. If you had cleaned more often then it wouldn't burn so much. Although I suppose you couldn't help that given your lifestyle.
After the bath, Kale started a fire and Irene stood in front of it while he quickly dried her off with a larger towel. She insisted she could do it herself, but Kale was impatient and did most of it for her. He did however let her finish drying her waistline as he went and fetched her a blanket to cover herself with. He returned and wrapped it around her, telling her to dry her hair with the towel as well.
I have to run to the shop to get you a nice pretty dress for tomorrow's charade. And while I'm gone I can trust you not be stupid enough to try running away, can't I?
Irene scowled her face at him and said,
My name is Irene, and I had clothes until you cut them apart. Those things were filthy and rancid smelling, would have taken days just to get the stench out of them, and I don't have that kind of time. Besides, you still need to be in something more pretty, more feminine.
Kale then left the house, leaving Irene to contemplate her options. Her first thought was to run away immediately and go back to the slums. He wouldn't be able to find her there, and she still had her boots intact. But she wasn't stupid. Even with the blanket and her boots it wouldn't be enough to survive come next winter, and she doubted she would be able to steal a pair of clothes or enough money to buy clothes if she went around with only a blanket to wear. She still feared what the man, Kale, would do with her when he was done, but he didn't entirely seem like a bad person either. When Kale returned with the new outfit, Irene was still there warming by the fire.
Good to see you're still here, he said. Means you're not as stupid as I might have thought. Should I be insulted by that or complimented?
Irene asked rhetorically.
Either way you won't be having the attitude tomorrow,
Kale said sternly.
I'll explain when we're done, but for now hurry up and try this on, I need to make sure it fits properly.
He pulled out a blue woolen cloth dress with white cuffs from the bag he brought in and handed it to her. He also handed her a small pair of shoes of the same color. When she finished putting them on, he brought her to his bedroom, where he had a tall mirror resting against the wall. She hadn't remembered the last time she looked at herself through a decent reflection and almost forgot what she looked like herself. Her long ginger hair, the freckles dotted over her face and cheeks, pale skin. She smiled at how pretty she looked in the dress and twirled around in a moment of glee.
It fits you well,
Kale said, bringing her back down to reality.
We just need to make one final adjustment. You need a haircut, then you will be set for tomorrow.
Grabbing a pair of scissors, Kale said,
Keep your head straight and don't move it until I tell you it's okay, understand?
Yes, Irene said. And then Kale started snipping away at her hair. Long strands fell to the floor as he began to slow down when he was making finer cuts around her ear. He trimmed her bangs and sheared her hair to neck length. Then he combed her hair to the sides in as best a feminine look he could do, for a man at least. Irene looked like a completely different person, which was the point of all of this.
You still have not told me what you need me for tomorrow,
Irene finally asked him.
I thought it a little obvious for someone as smart as you,
Kale said a little mockingly.
We're going to raid the Mystic Vault tomorrow. But why do you need me? I don't entirely, but my former assistants in the matter had plans to backstab me once I got them inside, so I took care of them beforehand. Now, though, I can at least have a sentinel to watch the hall and alert me if anyone is coming. And that's where you come in. Tomorrow I shall pass you off as my daughter, as I did today, and pretend to take you on a tour inside the vault. Once inside I will swiftly acquire the treasures I need and we will leave. Won't there be guards right next to the vault entrance though? You won't have to worry about that, I will take care of them. Anyways, if there is no more questions on the subject, then I would like to start cooking supper so we may eat soon, for I am very hungry.
They ate their warm meal in silence, and when she was done, Irene finally got the courage up to ask,
What will you do with me after you get what you need from the vault?
Kale responded to that with a question of his own.
What did you intend to do with the treasures you stole from the Mystic Vault, assuming you got away with them, that is? Sell them for enough money to pay your way into an apprenticeship, or perhaps just one final score to get you paid off enough to survive on for a few good years. I was going to use them to climb that dark tower.
Irene half shouted, feeling embarrassed about the answer. Kale burst into laughter at her answer and her cheeks flustered a glowing red. When Kale settled down, he said,
Well, I'll be. Out of all the answers I could have expected, or even guessed, never was that one of them. It's not a joke,
Irene muttered to herself, still feeling embarrassed about Kale's reaction.
I believe you, young missy. In fact, it makes much more sense than anything else given how dangerous your plan was. You're willing to risk everything to reach the top of that tower, are you not?
Irene nodded in answer. Kale scratched his chin and said,
Well, let's see how tomorrow goes and then we will figure out what to do then. Remember, you're my daughter Mora if anyone asks, and I am taking you on a tour of the vault since you have been asking me to see it for a year now,
Kale said while brushing her hair neatly to the sides.
Yes, I understood you the first time,
Irene said, annoyed. Kale then grabbed a brown leather bag and put the single strap over her shoulder.
Once we're inside we will have about 10 minutes to get whatever we can before we must leave. I know exactly what I am going for and you may fit whatever you can carry into the bag for your own sack. But don't grab anything too heavy or that would make lots of noise even in the bag.
When they were set, they left straight away to the temple, Kale wearing his guard uniform as he had the day before, and Irene her new dress and shoes. Outside, the cold cut right through the dress and gave her chills, but she bared it as much as she could until they got into the warm temple. They made their way down into the passages, encountering no one else until they made it to the vault doors. To Kale's great surprise, they were not only wide open, but there was half a dozen men and women, all wearing fine silk clothes, down there speaking with the guards. The guards saw Kale approaching and one of them said,
Ah, Kale, you're a little early, the king's magisters are here to get.
He paused a moment and thought before continuing.
They're getting
He turned to one of the women and asked,
What was it you said you were grabbing, my lady?
The woman turned around annoyed and said to the guard,
It's none of your business anyways.
Then she turned to Kale and Irene and stared at Irene and demanded to know who she was. Kale was too nervous to answer right away, so Irene beat him to it. She bent her legs in a light bow and said,
My name is Mora, if it pleases you, my lady. And what would please me more is to know what you're doing here, Mora.
The woman said, skeptical of Irene. The other men and women had now turned their attention to Irene and Kale and asked about her, but in a much more kind fashion. Irene displayed the same manners she did of the lady to the others and politely said her name was Mora. They turned to Kale then asked him, in a more stern fashion, what she was doing down there. She answered before him, again,
Oh please sirs and ladies, don't be mad at him, it's all my fault. I have been asking him for so long to show me the inside of the vault, it always sounded so amazing and I couldn't help but dream of what was behind those doors.
The men and women looked about each other, then one of them said,
I suppose it is no harm at all since we are all here and the doors are opened anyways, but try not to touch anything, young lady, some of that stuff is dangerous. You really mean it?
Irene asked with such glee that even Kale was buying into it. They smiled and led Kale and Irene into the mystic vault. The mystic vault was lined inside with numerous magic items, tools, and weapons. Some of them stood neatly on pedestals, others just sitting on the ground. The place was a bit of a maze and Irene was small enough to disappear entirely in there, which was exactly what she did. As the group moved forward, gradually Irene stepped out of pace with them and slipped away to fill her bag with treasures. She made sure to get as far away from them as she could before looking around for stuff to steal. Knowing nothing about magic, she had no idea what would be best to take, but being limited on space, her options for items were limited. The first thing to catch her eye was a small thin dagger with a dim blue glow to it. It stood on a pedestal next to its handle. Irene reached up to grab it, and had a little trouble reaching it but managed to get it down without making any noise. After admiring its beauty a moment longer, she slid the dagger into its sheath and put it into the bag. The next thing to catch her eye was a dazzling blue cloak of silk hanging on a rack. She had to carefully stand on a nearby pile of jagged stones to get the cloak down. She wobbled a lot but didn't fall and managed to get the cloak and roll it up to put in her bag. The voices of the others soon came closer to her and she quickly fled away from the spots of the treasures she had stolen. She tried moving around the voices, using them as her guide to navigate, but soon found herself actually lost until she bumped into someone. She fell on her butt and started apologizing right away. She looked up and saw the unattractive woman from before, the one giving her a hard time before.
"And just where were you going in such a rush?"
the woman demanded to know. Irene rose to her feet and said,
"I'm sorry, I was so caught up in the beauty of this place that I lost track of where I was going, and when I realized I was lost I sort of panicked and tried to follow the voices back to everyone." "And why didn't you just call out for help then, or for one of us to come find you?"
she asked suspiciously. Irene's cheeks turned red and she put on a fake stutter.
Didn't he want everyone to think I was some idiot who couldn't even find her way around the vault?"
She looked down at her feet now.
"And if the other kids heard of how I got lost in here, they would make fun of me for weeks."
The woman studied Irene closely for a brief moment, then sighed and said,
"A young lady's troubles are relentless, aren't they? Men have it easy, just punch a few faces, laugh about it afterwards, and your problems are solved. But us women, we're the ones who must do all the real work. How the gods saw it fit that men would rule is beyond me. Anyways, enough about that. Come on, I shall take you to the others and this will be our little secret."
She then put her hand out and Irene took it and followed her back to the others. Back at the group, Kale played the concerned father figure part so perfect that Irene actually allowed herself to believe, for a moment, he cared about her. The woman who escorted her back just explained that she was showing her around to the real treasures. When things were all settled, Kale said,
"All right, I think I have taken up more than enough of all your valuable time. I should get this one back home, and thank you all so much for this. My daughter will have such a tale to speak of to the other kids. I shall be back here shortly without her to continue my guard duties. It has been such an honor to be in here."
With that, Kale bowed and escorted Irene out of the vault and quickly back to the surface level. They moved swift but inconspicuous all the way back to Kale's house. Once inside, they allowed themselves a very brief moment of relaxation.
"I swear, if I ever have to bow my head to some magister shit again, it better be to dodge an arrow, or better yet a spear, coming from behind me,"
Kale said, exasperated.
"You did great back there. Where the hell did you learn to act like that?" "I mostly made it up as we went along." "Well, it was damned good. You might even have saved our skins back there. I didn't get as much as I would have liked, but I could not stand to wait another month bowing to those arrogant magister bastards and whores, just for another shot to steal more of their precious mystic tools. Anyways, get your boots on, we have to leave the city right away. The longer we delay here, the more time they have to realize some stuff is missing. They do inventory tomorrow and I want to be a few good leagues away from here by then at least."
Kale started quickly stripping his guard uniform off and revealed the dark full-body leather armor on beneath it.
"You still have not told me what you intend to do to me now that you got what you wanted."
Kale paused and was silent for a long minute. Finally he said,
"You intend to go to the Devil Tower to ascend it, no?" "Yes, I will do whatever I must to reach the top." Well, I'm going to, and I figured you might as well join me, at least on the road there. Maybe I can teach you a few things on the way, better your odds of reaching the top. Either way, you cannot stay here in this city, they will find you and they won't be near as kind as they were today when they do. So the choice is up to you, get on your boots and follow me, or stay and do as you like. Either way, I'm leaving right now."
Kale then went into the other room and came back out with a large bag strapped to his shoulders. There were a couple pots and pans hanging on the side of it. He was well prepared. Kale left the house without another word, leaving Irene to herself. He meant what he said. Quickly, she got on her boots and chased after Kale.
We'll have to get you some real clothes on our way to the tower. I have a friend who lives in a village along the way. She's a good tailor, should be able to set you up with something more practical. Anyways, we need to exit through the sewer. The bridge is too well known and I want them thinking I'm still in the district somewhere when they come looking for me.
Somehow the sewers smelled worse than ever before this time through them, but it would be the last time through, ever, so Irene gave no complaint. They left the sewers entering into the structure district and Kale led Irene to a stable. He paid the man a gold coin for a brown horse and helped her climb up onto it. She sat in front of him on the saddle and as soon as he was up too he pulled the reins and they were off at a good paced trollop, not speeding down the road to avoid unwanted attention. They left the city at the same pace too and as they trotted along down the dirt road Irene looked back to the city. The only life she ever knew was back in there, she never believed she would leave it, but now as they galloped outside she wondered if she would ever have cause to return. The world outside already seemed so much better to her in every way. Chapter 7 The Frigid Prince, Chapter 1 North a few leagues from Galliac Hall, the great castle of the Tarok family, was a small river stream descending from the northern mountain. The waters in the river were ice-cold year-round, which is why Prince Anagil loved it so. Whenever he was troubled he would go there, his brothers knew where to find him there easily and pick on him. But during the winters they seldom came, if they wanted to pick on him in there they would need to go into the icy waters and get him. Today however he sat on the snow-covered grass near the river staring out into the lands beyond. White snow blankets covered all the hills beyond him, but to him the sight was serene. Numerous footsteps crunching in the snow caught his attention and he rose to his feet, hand on his blade. It was none other than his elder brothers, Thames, Bjornid, and Angrim. Though Anagil was a bit taller than them, he was far more slender and looked nothing like any of his family. His hair was frosted blue and his skin pale and never seemed to darken shade. His brothers however, all 6 of them, had skin varying in 10 shades of brown. Some had shaved their head entirely like their father Aberon, others kept it very short. Their eldest brother Torith was the only one of them with long hair, it was tousle and dark, like their mother's. Angrim was the 4th son of Aberon and the oldest there at the time, so he was the one to speak. He also took the most pleasure in harassing Anagil.
We knew you would be here,
he said smug.
And what you plannin' on doing with that blade, cutting us? How as if you could, you're so frail you would drop it just from hitting a tree.
The others laughed, but what Angrim said was only half true. Anagil may not have the strength they possess or the speed, but he was far more durable than any of his brothers and had stamina to burn long after they would tire. Anagil removed his hand from his sword and let it go to his side, turning his head from his brothers. He wished in quiet that they would just leave him alone. They stepped closer and Angrim continued,
Your birthday is in a fortnight, you know what that means don't you? Means another beating for you. You excited? I figure by now you like them beatings don't you?
Anagil remained silent and kept his head turned from them, afraid to look them in the eye. Angrim grew angry by this and half shouted,
Look at me you little shit!
He complied and turned his head to face him and Angrim punched him right in the face hard as he could. Anagil was forced to step back but no more. Hoping for a better result Angrim grew even angrier and then kicked Anagil in the chest, knocking him down into the snow. His piercing blue eyes illuminated for an instant of rage but immediately faded away as Anagil got control of his anger. He started to rise up to his feet but Angrim was atop him now and placed a foot on his chest, pushing him back down into the snow.
Father wants you home by tomorrow night at the latest. It's about your duel this year on your name day, this time it's going to be different.
Angrim leaned closer to Anagil's face and half whispered,
This year your duel will be to the death. Father is tired of you mocking our family name with your sorcery powers and weak will. Says this time either you prove yourself worthy of the name Tarok or you be erased from our family line for good.
With that Angrim and his other brothers left, content they tortured Anagil enough for the time being. With his brothers gone Anagil returned to his former position, looking out onto the northern lands of Aladern and was consumed with the thoughts of recent news. Angrim was many things, cruel among them, but he was not a liar, least not a good one. What he said had to be true, his father finally decided. He proved himself once and for all, probably on his mother's wishes. So consumed in his thoughts, he failed to notice the small group that had approached him from behind until one of them spoke up.
Another ass-kicking?
The voice asked from behind. Anagil gave a small jump, startled by their presence. He turned around to see Tom, Roward, and Dodmere. They were outcasts just like him and lived in the eastern village a couple leagues away from the mountain river that Anagil frequently visited. They met on the hottest day of summer many years back where even the northern wind blew hot air. The only place they knew to cool down was that river stream where the water would be chilled no matter what. The people of Aladern were not accustomed to hot days. Even in the summertime the hills and mountains had a cool breeze to them, but that summer was something different. Most the common people went around naked during those summer days, men and women, they all stopped caring. Even Anagil was wearing lighter cloths than he normally did. The cold never bothered him, he could walk stark naked in a winter storm and feel better than ever, but the heat irritated him greatly.
Nothing I cannot handle,
Anagil said.
I didn't think to see you here until spring.
They were all wrapped up in thick fur cloaks of whatever animal they caught or could afford to wear around them to protect them from the cold. They were low-born, but neither they nor Anagil took matter on that sort of position and enjoyed their company as if they all came from the same levels of society.
All these years and we still cannot fathom how you can be so fine in the cold like this,
Raoul said.
I mean, look at you, leather boots, silk robes, and no gloves, and you are not even shivering for warmth.
Anagil was quiet in thought for a short time, then said,
Maester Lena says it's all due to my strange magic powers. She says it's a gift from the gods, but my family disagrees, says I'm cursed and a stain on the family legacy. One of the few magic people born in Aladern, and I had to be born into the royal family Tarok. 4 generations our family has been the greatest warriors in all of Aladern, it's why we rule, father says.
He sighed and solemnly said,
Sometimes I wonder if I am indeed even their child, they wonder too. Well, my prince, you know, we would be here for you any other day, but we were out here to hunt and were chasing a score until it lead us around here and we lost track of it. So unless you can conjure a couple rabbits with that magic of yours, we have to keep hunting, lest we starve.
A silver coin then flipped through the air at Raoul and he caught it.
Please don't leave,
Anagil pleaded.
That will buy you whatever you need for your next few meals. I could use your company after the news I received.
The 3 looked at each other, then Raoul said,
We can stay with you then, but can we keep moving? The cold does affect some of us here.
Anagil rose to his feet and began walking with his friends. They moved with their backs to the wind.
Angrim and the others came by today,
Anagil said.
Says father wants me back at the castle within a fortnight. It's about my 16th name day. Who are you supposed to be dueling this time?
Tom asked, concerned.
I don't know, but Angrim says this year it's to the death. Says father either wants me to prove myself this time or wash away the stain upon our family legacy. And you believe Angrim? He's not exactly been kind to you in the past, this might be a new torture he has for you. Angrim is many things cruel, but lying he was never good at, too stupid to be, I think. Anyways, yeah, I guess I saw this coming. I'm the only son to have lost all his name day duels. Even Thames managed to win his duel by 15, I think it's also because I'm not like them that father is pushing this. I don't know if he believes in me or just wants to get rid of me. What did your father normally say to you after you lost your duels?
Raoul asked.
Called me weak and beat me,
Anagil said.
And what about your mom?
Tom asked.
She just beat me harder, managed to break a bone or two one year. You think it has something to do with that dark tower that sprouted up in Evercane few weeks ago?
They all turned their heads to the east to stare at the mysterious tower beyond their lands. Many speculate that the tower is the Evercane's new defense. Others say it's a dark omen of a great storm to come and consume the lands and all of Grimnir. Anagil never gave it much thought. It was very peculiar, at first, but quickly became a distraction he couldn't afford in his life. He had to worry about his next coming duel to prove himself a man when he has not improved much with his weapon skills or hand-to-hand. And now he finds out this duel may be his last if he cannot find a way to win.
I don't know, and I don't really care. The fact is that my duel is coming and now it's to the death. So I need to spend what little time I have left preparing for it. With any luck, my father has selected someone who isn't a renowned warrior. Or a soldier.
He let out a somber sigh and said,
The gods hate me, I cannot fight with swords, axes, or even my fists. I wasted enough time here, I need to go home and prepare myself.
They bid farewell and turned opposite ways to go home. All except Dodmir, the quiet one of the group, who had chased after Anagil for a final word. He spoke in a low tone but loud enough to be heard easy enough from the short distance.
You may not have the same speed or strength as your family, but you do have your own power. And when it's live or die, it matters not how you win, it's the fact that you do. Honor serves only those with the shorter lifespans, my prince.
With that, Dodmir was off, his strange cryptic message forcing Anagil to think from a different perspective. Galliot Hall, the royal Tarok family castle, built into the base side of the small mountains. Though over the many generations the mountain has crumbled away, disappearing back into the Dorgal kingdom, the castle still remains. As legend has it, the castle will stand until the end of the Tarok family line. When the last great Iron Warrior falls, so too will the castle of their forefathers. Galliac Hall was built into 3 main levels of castle, each ascended by only one large stairway with many sub-levels in them. Each level had its own great dining hall. The first level was built on the ground. It serves as the main defense and only entrance into the castle. The main castle guards are stationed on the first level, sleeping barracks and training grounds. The second level is where a majority of the servants' sleeping quarters are, and many other of the castle's functioning utilities such as the main kitchen or blacksmith's armory. The third and final main level of the castle is home to the royal family chambers, the throne room, and most important to King Aberon, the primary dueling grounds. For generations the Tarok family has proven their might as either young soldiers on the battlefields, or if there is no war for their time, they prove themselves as men to the mighty war gods in the third level dueling grounds. The grounds themselves are located a separate floor 100 feet in diameter above the third level of the castle. It's carved mostly into the mountainside, but the ground is flat and the weather has total access to it. Many generations ago the duels up and there would always be to the death to simulate a real-life battle. But as time went on the Taroks abandoned that ancient rule, given that they would either lose one of their own blood, clearly not ready for battle, or they would lose a great warrior whom they would need for war. Knowing all this, Inagil was still somewhat surprised when his father wanted to meet with him out on the dueling grounds to discuss his 16th name day duel. King Aberon was a massive and brooding figure to Inagil. He looked up to his father, admired him greatly, and feared him just as much. His head was shaven completely and his dark brown skin remained the same shade of color year-round, no matter how much or how little he was outside in the sun. Aberon was a very powerful man, his fists hit as hard as hammer and he stood above most men. The two stood outside on the primary dueling grounds with just them out there.
I assume you have heard by now the circumstances around your 16th name day duel this year?
Aberon asked. Inagil always had a hard time looking into his father's eyes. The yellow gleam in them was frightful to everyone, but he did not turn his head away from him either. He felt it was too disrespectful.
Yes, father, Angrim told me a few days ago,
Inagil said. Aberon nodded and said,
I wish it had not been this way for you. I sense you have a power of your own that will take more time to mature and bloom than your brothers, but your mom insisted it so. And at the end of the day she is right, no Tarok has ever lost a duel past his 16th name day. Most our family would have earned their first victory by 15 at the latest, whether it be single combat or in a full battlefield.
Inagil looked down at his feet, disappointed with himself. His father placed both his hands on his shoulders and he looked back up.
You make me proud to call you my son this coming week, right boy?
He hesitated to answer but then spoke up and said,
Yes, my king.
Aberon nodded and said,
Soon you will be a man. We'll speak more after your duel, so you spend this time preparing. I already told your brothers no one is to disturb you until after your name day, so you won't have to worry about interference. Good luck, boy. Next time we meet I will be calling you son.
He turned and left Inagil alone after that. Those words were exactly what he needed to hear. His father believed in him when no one else did, not even himself. Inagil spent the next 10 days he had before the duel practicing with a spear. He knew he was too slow to wield any other weapon properly, so his best chance was to keep the distance between him and his opponent as great as he could, while still being able to attack. In those short days he made little progress with the spear, and on the 11th day he turned 16, it was time for his duel. On the far edge of the dueling grounds, right in front of the staircase leading out, sat King Aberon, his wife Bethany, and his 6 other sons. In addition to the many lords and ladies of Aladern kingdom, those that received the invites at least. Near 30 people that day were watching Inagil and his duel, the one that would either make him a worthy man of his family name or kill him. All eyes were on him, but the only eyes he cared about were his father's. His father's face showed confidence in Inagil and he too felt confident. Even if he had to fight without honor, or go tooth and nails with his opponent, he would do it, and he would win. He was armed with his spear and double-layered leather armor. He needed as little additional weight as he could get in order for his strategy to work. The crowd began to part out of the way for his coming challenger. His father had not said who it was, but he knew he would find someone who would give him as equal match as possible. Out of the crowd emerged a moderate-sized bulky man, with black hair pulled back tight and braided into a tail. His skin was dark, darker than even the Tarok family, where theirs was closer to shades of brown. His was like almost completely black. Sir Darik he was called, and he was known as one of Aladorn's greatest warriors. Inagil was in utter shock at his chosen opponent and turned to look at the crowd, and his father. Everyone there was as shocked as him, even his brothers and his father, everyone except his mother Bethany, who wore a smug look on her face. What chance had he against the great Sir Darik? Most everyone believed he was going to die that day, for a moment so did he. But as he let out his breath and drew it in steadily calming himself, he began to remember his strategy. Darik would no doubt underestimate him, and if he could get in just one good jab at the man's throat he would win. Darik wore no armor either, he was so confident, he only wore a fur coat to protect himself from the frigid cold outside, for the dueling grounds were higher up and there it was always coldest. He wielded a large single-sided axe and twirled it around in his hand like it was a stick. They stood 10 yards apart, waiting for the king to give his speech and then shout fight at the end of it. Aberon rose from his chair and everyone's quiet whispers stopped entirely as he began his speech.
On today, the 16th named day of my 7th son, Inagil Tarok, we have gathered to witness his ascension from a boy to a man. Today, being a special day, I have brought back the old tradition of the name day duel, were it to be a battle to the death. And so in the sights of the 3 war gods and the great men and women of Aladern, I say let the best man win. And prove to the gods they are a true warrior.
He hesitated an instant before shouting the final word. Fight! Darik twirled his axe a few more times in his right hand and slowly began walking in a round arc around Inagil, with each step gradually coming closer to him. Inagil moved with him, keeping his spear aimed at his opponent's torso but not too high to give away his intended target. They kept up in this motion of movement in a full circle until Darik was within Inagil's range. He thrust the spear at Darik's heart, the knight turned sideways to avoid it. As he turned, Inagil suddenly snapped the spear upwards in a swift and sudden slash movement, catching his opponent and the crowd by surprise. They all gasped as the leaf-shaped tip of the spear was stopped at Darik's neck, with a small trickle of blood flowing down it. Around the tip of the spear Darik's hand was grasped tightly, his eyes facing down, wide in disbelief, his nose flaring as he breathed in and out of it rapidly. Inagil tried pushing the spear closer and into his throat to finish the job, but Darik had a firm grip on it and it wasn't going to come any closer to him. He smiled, after catching his breath and calming down, and took a small step back still holding the spear. The cut on his neck flowed a small trickle of blood, but it was not enough to kill him.
Incredible boy,
Darik said.
I will admit this is the closest I have ever come to death, in all my battles. Had it been a lesser man than Darik Hasharan, then that move would have worked. Gods be cruel, had I chosen to wear my armor today I would not have been fast enough to catch that and would be dead. I see great potential in you, and I would love nothing more than to one day challenge you again when you have matured into a finer warrior. But indeed, the gods are cruel, and this is a battle to the death.
Darik stepped aside from the tip of the spear and suddenly pulled it towards him. Inagil was forced to move with it or let go. Darik raised his axe and with a strong downswing he cut through the wood past his hand and then let it go. The spear tip was lost and the spear now a useless blunt stick, but still Inagil held it. Darik then charged Inagil and Inagil suddenly tossed his remaining spear at him. As Darik swatted it away, Inagil met his charge and tackled him before he could swing his axe down upon him. Inagil got in a few good punches to Darik's face before he kicked him off and onto his back. Quickly he got back to his feet just as Darik swung his axe at him in diagonal fashion. He tried to evade the attack but wasn't quick enough and Darik slashed through his armor and cut across his chest. Darik followed up with a tilted kick into his chest, knocking him once more onto his back. As Darik advanced, going in for the kill, he said,
"And now boy you die."
Inagil's eyes radiated a sapphire glow and he put his hands out in front of him as Darik raised his axe.
"Fuck you!"
Inagil shouted. And out from his hands burst a brilliant stream of blue frost that froze Darik into a statue of ice instantly. The crowd was amazed and stunned by Inagil's sudden and frightening attack. Inagil got to his feet, staring at Darik's frozen form for a moment, then with a strong blow he shattered the former great warrior into dozens of little pieces of frozen meat. He looked over to his father, whose face was an array of mixed emotions. Light murmurs soon erupted from everyone in the crowd until Bethany called for the guards to restrain Inagil. She ordered him to be locked in the dungeon and he didn't resist. He won, that's all that mattered to him. Chapter 8 The Frigid Prince, Chapter 2 Several days after Inagil was thrown into the dungeon he received his first visitor. He was excited at first, expecting it to be his father, come to release him and congratulate him on his victory. Instead it was Maesterlina. She was wrapped head to toe with thick clothes. The elder woman had a great issue dealing with the cold. He preferred to see his father, but Maesterlina was to him the next best thing. She was the only person kind to him in that entire castle and he thought of her more of a mother than his own. He rose to his feet to greet her and she smiled at him.
This is no place for you,
Lena said solemn.
It's no place you either,
Inagil countered. Her smile grew and she reached through the bars to grab Inagil's hands.
My dear boy, I was so scared when your mother announced that your duel was to the death and then arranged for Sir Darik to fight you. Yet I was frightened too when I saw who I was fighting, but here I am, the victor.
He said sounding upset.
You fought valiantly, better than anyone ever expected of you. And they put a young man like yourself who still had much growing to do against one of the kingdom's greatest fighters. Your father should have stopped that duel before it began and arranged someone more equal to you. Your brothers all faced equal opponents. Some a little better but never one so well talented and experienced. Has my father said anything of me?
She looked down and shook her head.
He's not said a word since your victory, I'm afraid. He's mad at me, isn't he? He's mad because how I won that duel. Now, why would you think something like that?
She asked, baffled by the question.
Because of how I won, because it was not with a weapon or my fists, but instead with magic. It wasn't done the Tarok way. You know, sometimes I wonder if I really am one of them. They're all great warriors and I am just a disgrace compared to the rest of them. Now you look at me, boy,
she said in commanding tone.
I pulled you into this world, healed many of your wounds, including that one across your chest. I had a huge part in raising you too. And if you think you're not a Tarok, then you need to take a closer look at your lineage. What do you think is the Tarok family power?
Inagil had to think about the answer for a minute. Then he said,
power, strength, leadership. Yes, your family has power, your kin embrace their strengths, and you have strength of will above all. These things combined is why your family rules Aladern, the toughest land there is in Grimnir. And you, my boy, are the most powerful Tarok in generations. That's why your brothers hate you so, they're jealous of you. I have seen them knock you down 1,000 times over and more, and tell you you're a disgrace, but still, you stood back up and you stayed. That is the power of your will. They punched you and kicked you as much as they could, but you never broke. Instead they tired out and you could keep on fighting. That is your strength. And since you were a babe, the cold has never once touched you. You walked home in a blizzard half naked once and was as fine as you were when you left. And at your duel, you turned a powerful adversary into a frozen sculpture of ice that you broke apart in one blow. That is your power. You're right, though you are not like them, you are better. Thousands of boys will become warriors here in Aladern, but only a few will be magi. And you know that a magi that reaches their full potential can take on more warriors than your father, mother, or brothers ever could. And you, my frigid prince, you will blossom into an amazing magi that will make this entire kingdom proud to call you Tarok, and say you came from here.
Inagil seldom cried before. Even when he was young and his brothers beat him up, he didn't cry. But today with Lena's speech he couldn't help it. She always knew how to best heal his wounds, physical or emotional. While he struggled to make his father proud, she struggled for him to be proud of himself. The day slipped by for Inagil after Lena's visit. He stopped wondering when or if his father would visit or when they would let him out of there. He instead focused on his powers. It was tricky to control them at first, but with nothing else to do all day he kept at it, steadily getting better. As his entire cell was frozen over, the guards had to move further away from it to keep warm. They could have told him to stop, but he was still a prince, and they were afraid of his powers if they were to upset him, so they kept quiet and just moved further from him. And the times continued on, but still no one more came to visit him. He thought about escaping once but wondered where he would go if he did, and so he abandoned the thought. One night as the moon was full, he stared out of the bars in his cell and into the sky. He watched as a shadow began to eclipse the moon, darkening the lands below. A strange drowsy sense fell over him and he couldn't resist the command for him to slumber and fell over unconscious. That night he dreamed of that mysterious dark structure in the east, dreamed of its doors opening wide for all. He heard the voice inside of it, and the wish it promised. And later he awoke, the sun was rising up and he knew what to do to make his father proud of him. To make his whole family see who he truly was, but first he had to escape.
Guard!
He shouted. No answer. He waited another minute, then shouted again, Guard! He shouted again, and moments later he heard the guards waking up and talking amongst themselves. He shouted for them again, then again, and kept on it until one of them came. He was a gruffly man, much like most the men of Aladern.
What do you want?
He asked, irritated.
I want a piece of parchment, some ink, and a writing quill. And I wanna fuck the queen for all the good it does me. What's in it for me if I get you this stuff?
Inagil hesitated in thought, then said,
It's been rather cold down here in this dungeon, and I can make it much colder, so much that not even a fire will keep you warm and you will have to abandon your posts just to keep from freezing to death. Cannot imagine my father, the king, would be too happy about you doing that now. Or I could retract the ice and you can keep your posts and my father won't toss your asses out into the woods for negligence.
The guard swallowed the lump growing in his throat then left. He didn't say whether or not he'd grab what Inagil requested, but he had no choice but to hope for his threat to play out the way he wanted. Inagil was relieved when the guard returned later with what he asked for. And breakfast. As the guard handed him the parchment, quill, and ink bottle, he said,
All right boy, I got what you wanted, now get rid of this bloody ice. That will take time, a couple days at most, but I promise that by later tonight you won't have to worry about it anymore.
The guard cursed a little but didn't push Inagil and went back to his position until the next guards came to swap them out. Inagil ate his breakfast fast and then used the light shining in from the window bars to write out his note. He had to make haste for his ink bottle was quickly freezing over. When the note was finished, he let it dry out and kept reading it all day, while waiting until dark, assuring himself over and over this was his only course of action, and his best. After his last meal, he sat at the back of the cell, closing his eyes to try and sleep a little, before it was time to make his escape. He dreamed of nothing and woke up to see the large moon still in the sky. He hadn't missed his mark. He waited for a group of storm clouds to overtake the moon before he conjured a pedestal of ice, placing his note safely atop it. Then he went to the bars on the cell and wrapped his frigid hands around them. A thin blue mist casually drifted off the bars as they froze over and became so brittle he could pull them out like pulling a small branch from a tree. The bars breaking off were almost entirely noiseless, and carefully Inagil placed the pieces he pulled out onto the floor. He stepped out of the cell, a blue mist coming off him, his eyes gleaming sapphire. The two guards on detail stood far away from his cell and with their backs turned to him. He simply knelt down and put his hands flat on the floor, extending his will and his power forth. As he did, the ice steadily crept along towards the guards until it reached the base of their feet. Then it hastened, like a ravenous beast swiftly consuming its prey. The ice froze over the guards entirely before they even knew what was happening. The cold frost from his magic had blown out the torches to the dungeon, but Inagil always had a strong nocturnal vision, and navigating the, now dark, dungeon was easy as before to him. He walked to the thick wooden doors closing off the dungeon and blocking any would-be escaped prisoners, like himself, and froze it over quietly. Now he could get an even larger head start before anyone noticed he was gone. With that done, he returned to his cell and began to glaze over his brick wall with wisps of ice, weakening the stone until he could steadily break it apart. Outside, the storm clouds covered the skies and rain began a heavy downpour. It was like an act of providence to Inagil. Slowly but steadily he made his way through the wall, freezing over a thin layer to weaken it, then breaking it down. The whole process took him little over an hour, but he finally tore apart the wall leading to the outside, and casually walked out. Most of the guards had taken shelter from the icy rains, so that made it easy for Inagil to sneak over to one of the stables and steal a horse. There were no guards at the stables he aimed for. After all, who would be foolish enough to steal from the royal family stables in their own castle grounds? He took his favorite horse, Lucid, a pony he had raised since he himself was a child. It was his father's orders that all his children must raise and take care of their first horse they are to ride, gives them a better appreciation of the beasts, he says. Lucid was the only horse he could ride properly. All the others he tried were afraid of him, or felt uncomfortable in their gallop to him. Inagil hopped onto his horse and casually trotted him down the front path to the gates. The guards at the gates gave him some trouble, until he told them who he was. Then they opened the gate for him, and shut it soon as he was out. They didn't bother asking why he was no longer locked away. He sped Lucid down the known roads for a while until he had to go off course to cover his tracks. From there he slowed his horse down to brisk walk. He hated the slow pace he had to make, but unlike him, Lucid couldn't see through the darkness so well, and it would be an even slower trip if he had stumbled and broken a leg, forcing Inagil to walk on his own feet. Inagil traveled on for the full night, never stopping until the sun began to rise. The journey was wet and he began to feel the hunger by then, but his trail off the main road wasn't too bad. He managed to avoid most of the rougher terrains and found, by pure luck, the smallest hills. Even in the dark, Lucid understood what Inagil was doing and let him lead perfectly so. Even though there were many obstacles along the way, that would prove very detrimental to other riders in the dark, to Lucid and Inagil they seemed only some minor inconveniences, few here and there caused them to take small detours. Though with the sun up, Inagil allowed Lucid some rest, and was grateful for the rain to have stopped at crack of dawn too. He led Lucid into the sun to help him warm up more as he went off on a small hunt. He knew if he stopped to rest now without any catch, then he would find it even harder to hunt for food the next time. Hunting was another skill set ARan taught all his children. A king who knew how to hunt like a seasoned ranger. It was always peculiar to the other highborn and lords, especially since his father before him had not been a hunter at all. Regardless of why ARan taught his children these skills, Inagil was grateful for it, now more than ever. He had soon enough gotten lucky once more and found fresh rabbit tracks in the softened ground. Finding them was then easy, but his troubles came from how would he now capture them? He didn't dare risk going deeper into the castle to steal any supplies or weapons, so he had only Lucid and the clothes on his back. The rabbit would be moving on soon and his stomach was already growling at him. If he didn't find a way to catch them now, it might become impossible later. He cursed silently to himself. What good were his powers now if he couldn't even use them to catch some food? His ice was too slow to entrap them in a cage, at least with how little practice he had at his powers. If he only had a bow, then this would be easy. That last thought stuck with him. He didn't have the bow, but maybe he could launch a thin arrow of ice like it was shot from a bow. He had never before tried or even thought of it, but if he wanted to make it further, he needed to test the extent of his powers and see what he could do and what he could not with them. The rabbits began to finish their small meal and sniff the air. It was now or never. Inagil held his hands out in front of him, aimed at the two rabbits and bent in his fingers slightly, imagining they were like a bow and his magic was now like arrows. When he was ready, he shot out twin bolts of jagged ice from his hands. Swift as arrows they went. The first ice bolt pierced one of the rabbit's neck, killing it instantly. The second missed marginally and the other rabbit fled. Inagil jumped and half shouted with excitement, until he remembered he was on the run. He settled down after that and retrieved the rabbit and began picking up sticks, both thick and thin, along the way back to Lucid. Once before the rains before were a blessing, masking his escape. Now they were a great hindrance as all the sticks he could find were wet. He had no other choice but to let them dry out in the sun while he focused on making an ice blade to skin the rabbit. Making the blade itself wasn't too hard, far easier than his projectile ice, but he still had the issue of the fire now. The sticks were still moist, but he had no other choice but to keep rubbing them into a small cut on the little log he found until they began to dry and eventually smoke. After a couple hours he got a small fire going and struggled just as much to keep it up as he did to light it. His arms were very tired after that, but he had made fair progress all the same. The rabbit tasted bitter in comparison to what he was used to, but that was probably because he was not a very great cook. Lucid, thankfully, was smart enough to find his own meal of small plants and some mushrooms growing off the trunk of the trees. After the meal he put Lucid to rest and did so himself. After checking the area to make sure no one had been tailing him, he covered his tracks well. Inagil later woke up as the sun was setting and he hopped on Lucid as they were off again, heading to the Evercane border. Inagil stood at the far south bridge ruins of the Great River Mesa thinking about the story of the invasion attempt made by his father years ago. He wasn't even born back then, but even now standing by those ruins he could almost hear the cries of battle and the ring of metal in his ears. Barely any traces of the great battle that took place here still remain today. The Great River washed away his father's mark on history. He waited there until dusk started approaching. By that time he sent his horse running back home. He couldn't take Lucid with him where he was going. He could have gone down the middle bridge, the one still standing, but it was exclusive to traders and invited guests only, and he could not pull off the appearance for either, so he decided he would make his own bridge across, one of ice. When Lucid was gone, Inagil walked to the edge of the original bridge, kneeled down and slowly constructed a narrow path of ice. The ice path steadily grew more and more, reaching to the other end of the river and growing a little wider too. When it finally reached the other side of the river, from what Inagil could see, it was over 4 feet wide and looked to him a little frail. He was hesitant to take the first step onto his own creation, but soon enough did, as his night wouldn't last forever. He put his foot on the ice. It began to crack as he put more weight on it, so he quickly pulled it back. Frustrated at himself, he held his hands out to the bridge and started making it thicker with a beam of ice shooting into it. The cracks disappeared and he stepped foot on the bridge again, this time without hesitation. With his full force on it, the bridge of solid ice stood firm and his heart steadily slowed back down. He walked slowly at first, still cautious, but the further he went the more confident he was in his own bridge and began a brisk pace down it. By the time he reached the halfway point of his bridge, where there was no turning back, he began to hear it crack. Inagil panicked as the cracks grew louder and chased after him from behind. He started to run, and before long the cracks caught up to him and were racing ahead. He could hear the bridge collapsing behind him as he went, no more chances to turn back. He was almost there, but the collapsing bridge had caught up to him and he was forced to make large leap to get across at this point. With everything he had in him, he burst his energy forth from his legs and dived towards the other side of the river just as the bridge collapsed beneath his feet. He landed just beyond the river, his face planted in the dirt. He spit out the grass he bit down by accident when he landed and cheered triumphantly. He got to his feet, the last remnants of his frozen bridge already fallen into the river.
"This is my power,"
he said to himself.
"I can do this. I'm going to cross over into Evercane and go to that tower."
He then turned and continued onto the wall. Up close, Anagil saw the wall was larger than he imagined, reaching into the sky and stretching all the way across the Evercane kingdom. He had to get over it before he could get to the tower, but he did just cross the great river Mazel with his own bridge of ice. He can do this. Steadily Anagil built up a small rectangular block of ice, using his powers, and stepped on it. He then created another one larger than the one before and fused their bases together. Keeping up this process, step by step, Anagil created himself a staircase, though ugly in appearance, was very sturdy in comparison to his bridge, and gradually as the night drifted away his stairs grew until dawn had approached and he reached the top of the wall. He was exhausted now, using his powers so much had worn him out greatly, but he couldn't stop yet, he now needed to get down. At first he was planning on crafting another stairway of ice to descend, but as the sun rose in the sky the guards atop the wall were able to spot Anagil. They were still some distance from him, but he didn't have enough time to form a staircase down before they got to him. He needed to improvise and fast. As quick as he could, Anagil began crafting an ice ramp that curved into itself to keep him from sliding off and guided him down. He made the base attached to the wall as fortified and thick as he could before working on the ramp. It began to spiral down steadily as he went, but he only made it halfway down the wall before the guards were upon him, swords drawn and pointed at him ready to cut him down if he made a single move towards them. They saw his great powers, so were cautious to come close to him, but their caution didn't last and they began to advance closer. Anagil held his hands up, no longer crafting the ice slide. He began to back up towards it slowly, saying,
"Easy fellas, I don't want any trouble." "What are you doing here, and how did you get all the way up here?"
one of the guards asked, keeping his blade pointed towards Anagil. Anagil was now at the base of his slide, but the guards had finally come close enough to him to touch his neck with the tips of their swords. He swallowed a lump in his throat and pointed his finger towards his ice-formed stairs. With his hands still up, it was a difficult task. The guard who asked him the question then looked over to the stairs of ice and his mouth dropped, his sword almost dropped with it.
"I don't believe this, guys, come look at this."
Slowly, the other guards went over there and stood amazed at the staircase of ice ascending from the ground to the top of the wall. While they were distracted, Anagil turned and dived onto his ramp, praying to all the gods it would hold his weight. It did, but he slid down it fast and soon realized he hadn't a chance to finish it. The turns came fast and he almost lost the count of how many there were until the edge. As he zipped down the twisting slide, he counted each turn until he got to right before the last one and prepared to hastily continue the slide whilst still going down it. But as the turn came, he was going too fast and began to free fall off the wall. There was no time to scream, he could only then act. And Anagil only had one thing he could do. Thrusting his hands out, he shot out a beam of ice from his hands, desperately trying to form a ramp from the ground up to save him. The ramp started to form and quickly rose to meet his descent, but wasn't fast enough, and his fall onto it was a painful one, met with a loud thud. He kept bouncing down the ramp instead of sliding. And with each bounce off the ramp, he hurt more and more all over, no control of his dynamic or momentum. For a time, he thought he was dead as his bouncing stopped and he was now just rolling, but when that stopped he dared to open his eyes. He was on the ground and his whole body hurt. Breathing was painful, but walking was excruciating. He lay back down, content to rest, when the sounds of two men screaming from high up caught his attention. It was two of the guards who boldly followed him down his ramp. But when they met the end of the first ramp and got to the free fall, they were not prepared. They must have expected it to keep going. Anagil watched as they landed on his other ramp and exploded in a show of gore. He turned away a little frightened by it. That could have been him. It would have been him if he was not blessed with such a sturdy body. Was that too a byproduct of his magic? Regardless of the answer, he was alive, and if he wanted to remain that way he had to keep moving. So despite the agony it cost him, Anagil pushed ahead in the Evercane lands, heading straight for the tower. Along the way there was a forest off to the north. Anagil went in there to hide as he could hear the sounds of galloping horses further at his back. He knew the guards from atop the wall, the ones still alive, must have reported him and were now in his pursuit. The woods gave Anagil shelter for the day and he soon enough drifted off to sleep, content to let his dreams dull his pain and exhaustion. He dreamt about falling down his slide just as it happened earlier, but this time when he crafted his safety ramp and hit down on it, it shattered apart and he kept falling. Just as he hit the ground, he woke up suddenly, his entire body pulsing with pain. From the cracks of light seeping through the thicket of trees, he could see the first rays of the morning light. He had been asleep at least all day and night. Starving, still in great pain, and exhausted, Anagil had to get up and hunt. It was easy enough tracking a deer, but catching it in this state was nothing like catching the rabbits. It took him a while, but he finally got a clear shot at it and took it down. This time, he was able to make a fire much easier with the dried wood, and skinning the deer was not hard either. The whole thing just hurt greatly in his condition. Anagil remained in the forest for many days after. He may have survived the fall, but whatever bones were not broken were surely bruised. If anything good came from his time in the forest, it was that the guards would surely have either lost interest in searching for him, which even he doubted, or had moved on further ahead, assuming he kept going. And from the fact he didn't hear anyone search the forest for him, he was sure that's what they were doing, is looking for him much further ahead. After all, they didn't know where his intended target was. The days had turned into weeks, while Anagil still remained in the forest recovering. By now winter had finally ended and spring was upon the lands in early bloom. When he finally recovered enough, Anagil left the forest and continued on to the tower. As he went, Anagil was able to take in the serenity and beauty of the Evercane lands. It was a beautiful landscape in comparison to the rough and coarse lands of Aladern. Where Aladern was all hills, mountains, and rocks, Evercane was flat grasses, sparkling rivers, and tranquil forests. The rest of the trip to the tower was uneventful for Anagil. He had passed by a number of towns and villages along his way, but he avoided them. It did him good anyways, as he had no money to pay for any food and he knew he wouldn't make a very good thief, as it were. Hunting in Evercane was also far easier than in Aladern. The animals were more abundant and had less places to hide. Eventually Anagil had reached the base of the tower, where he saw several planks of wood around the grey lands before the doors. A sign that numerous people had already gone to the tower, and many more were expected, but for the time there was no one else around. His journey to the tower was over, but his real journey had just begun. Chapter 9. Thrain and Company, Chapter 4. Cautiously Thrain and the others stepped through the dark veil covering the tower entrance. Beyond lay a massive round room, empty as far as they could see. The room was dim but lit with a strange natural light that seemed to emit from the walls and ceiling. When they saw there was no one or nothing else around, they moved forward, keeping talk to an absolute minimum while glancing around now and again for signs of anything. After hours of walking they came to the end, where there was a set of 4 wide staircases, each of them ascending up higher.
So do we just pick one at random?
Garen asked. No one in particular. Thrain turned to Vera and asked,
can you tell if any of them have some sort of hidden magical properties to them?
Vera stepped forward and let her magical senses flow forward to probe out the stairwells. It wasn't long until she gave up and said,
I can feel magic from all around in here, it's messing with my detection abilities. But as far as I can tell, these stairs are all the same.
Thrain mulled his thoughts over in silence until turning to Garen and saying,
Alright then, we shall have to just pick one at random, you call it.
Garen shrugged, then pointed out to the 3rd stairs on the right and said,
then let us go there.
They climbed the stairs in silence. The dim natural light gradually became brighter as they climbed. The staircase slowly curved around after the first bend. It took them hours just to reach the next floor. On the next floor, the floor was soft and a little padded, like stepping on ground made of sponges, almost. Spaced around the room, several feet apart each, were tall slender violet trees that had vines reaching down from the tops almost touching the ground. At the end of these vines were dark purple melon-sized fruits of some sort, each tree carrying over a dozen each. The sight of the mysterious fruit caused everyone's stomach to grumble. Realizing they hadn't eaten in hours, that mysterious fruit seemed rather tempting, assuming it was edible. But they continued forward for a time until Thrain, seeing there was no one or nothing else around, stopped them for a small break to eat. They each carried their own bag of specially enchanted food that would stay preserved for years and could be eaten anytime. They made sure to bring foods that didn't need cooking, and ate in silence. Looking around them vigilante for anything, for a time. After their meal they continued on, eventually finding another stairwell in the center of the floor. It was massive and pitch black inside, but it spiraled upwards, so they climbed it. Vera and Iris used their magic to conjure orbs of light to guide them up as they climbed. Time eluded them while they climbed. They only knew they were going for hours when their stomachs were feeling empty. Most of the floors they went up were rather simplistic to find the stairs, as they would usually be directly across from the first stairs that led them up to that floor. But now and again the group would reach an end wall and have to split up to search for the next set of stairs. The first few days climbing the tower was eerie for everyone as they continued in silence, still keeping a vigilant watch for any demons around, but when they found none they grew bored, and started talking to help pass the time. Conversing the most when they stopped to eat. That was when they were the most bored and needed some fun stories. Everyone traded their own stories around except Thrain. They kept asking for him to tell his story, the one of how he became the Lord Commander he is today at such a young age. But he kept telling them they all knew about his story and there was little more to add. Eventually they wore him down though.
All right,
Thrain said, irritated.
You guys want to know the real story about Aladern's invasion, and the Battle of the Three Great Bridges?
They were all sitting around in a circle eating, but somehow, even with their mouths stuffed, they all managed to answer at once, yes.
Well, for me it all started after I finished my apprenticeship with my father. He taught me so much about fighting that I was years ahead of my time. I was barely 14 back then. But because of my excellent skills in combat and my family name, I was immediately put into a lieutenant position in the Royal Army. 2 weeks later Aladern began their invasion. They moved fast in their initial march and managed to keep the news silent long enough to cut down our response time, forcing us to fight them on the bridges instead of past them like we would have preferred. Still we had ample time to set up our defenses. And when they came into full view they charged at us full force, targeting all 3 bridges simultaneously. Their forces were much greater than our own and it took them less than 2 days to start pushing us back. I was stationed in the back on the middle bridge with the Lord Commander Leon at the time. He was a great man in his prime, but he was old and his age showed when it came time to fight. Even so he was a master commander, better than I, and he kept us from being overrun that first day. He tried teaching me how to be a good commander then and there, but I didn't care about that. All I wanted was to crack skulls and turn the great river Mesa red with the slain soldiers of Aladern. So of course I foolishly and eagerly rushed ahead straight into the vanguard. My twin adamantite blades cut through the enemy's armor like it was leather. I must have slaughtered over 30 men that first day before they took down the men fighting with me and had me surrounded.
Rugal and Garen leaned in closer to Thrain, eager to hear more. They never knew about this side of their mentor before.
Well, I would have been dead had Commander Leon not charged in with his best knights and pulled my ass out of there on his horse. I'm sad to say that I realized the truth about why Leon was leading our men from behind and not charging in with them. I thought it was because he was too old to fight anymore, but when he was spotted the enemies all shouted, "Commander Leon is open, fire now everyone."
Thrain did his best to mimic the enemy's voices as he remembered in his head all these years.
A row of some of the best trained archers I ever seen then stepped out into the open, hidden among all the armored knights with spears and broadswords and shields. They took aim over me and a shot straight for Leon as soon as they could. He was their prime target all along. Everyone back then knew of the legendary commander. The arrows pierced his armor just as well as my swords cut through the enemies. But still bleeding out and half dead, Leon pulled me up on his horse and rode me back safely to the other end of the bridge. He died just seconds later before he could name me in charge, and the duties then went to that moron Bruce General.
Thrain stopped to gather his thoughts back for a minute after that.
Wait a second, the Lord Commander back then was Leon Egren?
Rugal inquired.
As in your father Leon?
Tears had started to leak from Thrain's eyes. He wiped them up before answering.
Yup, my father, Leon Egren. The greatest man that Kane ever known, dead because of my arrogance.
Everyone was silent after that. No one had anything to say, and Thrain was not yet ready to continue. He finished his meal swiftly, as if eating was the only way of taking his mind off that dark moment in his past. Eventually he continued, anyways, after that I was stuck near the wall, healing up for days while the struggle for the bridges continued. We managed to hold on to a good spot in the center bridge, but before long reports were in that the northern bridge was lost and had to be destroyed to prevent its capture, killing hundreds of men from both sides. Reinforcements from the north flocked to the center bridge and our struggle continued. When I finally healed up enough to get back to the field, and return to the bridge, I heard the news that the southern bridge too had been lost. And like the northern one, it was destroyed to prevent capture. That was it then. This was the last bridge left. If they took it, our lands would have been vulnerable to their invasion and we would have been conquered in a couple months' time. I told Commander Bruce we needed to collapse this bridge too. We were losing steadily as the Aladern troops pushed us further back each day. Commander Bruce was stupid, yet also a coward, so he didn't hesitate to go along with that plan even if it meant sacrificing all our men on the bridge at that time. Problem was we lacked the firepower of the Magisters to pull it off with the last bridge.
We had only 3 magisters still alive with us, and to destroy the bridge so quickly we needed at least 10. The next couple days we fought on, neither side gaining better footing. Until the South Commander, ARandomAudiobookAppeared, arrived with heavy reinforcements and we started taking the bridge back. ARandomAudiobookAppeared even took over as Lord Commander and sent Bruce to the vanguard. He was never seen again. Victory was in our sights, only to be once more stolen from our grasp when later reinforcements arrived, but not from the south. Apparently King Aberon was holding back some 400 of his men waiting until the other 2 bridges were collapsed. His master plan was unfolding at last and we were played like fools. He specifically made sure to overrun the other 2 bridges and to hold the middle one, while slowly taking out our magisters so we couldn't collapse the final bridge in desperation. Hold up, couldn't you just have retreated behind the wall?
Garen said, interrupting him before he could continue.
I mean they still would have to get through the Great Iron Gate and you could have just picked them off with your few magisters and countless archers from atop the wall while they tried breaking it down.
Thrain glared at Garen in annoyance and said,
yes, we could have done that, if King Aberon had not sent a fleet of ships, which by the way we didn't even know existed until too late, to sail around and invade from the north. We had no idea if that fleet pushed through and came into our lands because we stopped getting news about it. But even if they did, the real problem was we were not getting word to or from the other side of the wall. That's the real reason we didn't pull back behind the wall. We had no idea what happened to the men that were stationed around it, the ones responsible for opening or closing it. Because believe me, we did send them word. But when they didn't respond we couldn't even risk it. If we turned to flee behind the wall and that gate didn't open, we would all be dead within the hour.
Garen frowned and lowered his head.
Okay, continue please.
Thrain sighed and said,
well, you all know this part pretty well. Aberon took a lineup of his best and biggest men carrying full body-sized adamantite shields and slowly started walking across the bridge, literally pushing us back. The moving shield wall, they were going to take the bridge draws onto the open and kill us all off with their superior numbers. You know that day when I pushed through that near-perfect defense, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I was a stupid kid who decided if I would die then I would die the way I lived, reckless and exciting. So I hopped on my horse, shouted to the men still following under me, not actually believing they would follow me this time, and charged forth recklessly. And wouldn't you believe it, as soon as I collide with those men and their giant shields, I go flying off my horse and land right behind them, and their shields, and landed on like 3 other Aladern men who fell down with me. They were all just so surprised by it they didn't see the 8 other men that followed right behind me, colliding their horses in the shield wall and flying over with me. We got to our feet as fast as we could, drew our swords and started to raise hell for them. I managed to take down 2 of the men holding those big fucking shields before the men following me were cut down and I was next. I thought it was the end, but Commander Arno, for whatever reason, followed shortly behind us too, but with the full force of our remaining soldiers. And with 2 of those men carrying those shield dead, there was a large opening for the cavalry to ride through and just mow down Aberon's soldiers on the bridge. I passed out shortly after that sight due to blood loss and woke up an unknown time after that on the other side of the wall. We had managed to cause Aladern to retreat and found out that most of the invading fleet from the north was taken out by a giant squid, dubbed the Kraken. I was also named Lord Commander as ARandomAudiobookAppeared died pushing Aladern back.
Thrain then stood up and stretched his arms and legs.
Alright then, that's enough of that, let's keep going.
Everyone had in fact finished eating by then, but they stayed to hear Thrain's story. Now they continued on.
But there is more, isn't there?
Rugal asked. Thrain didn't turn around and kept going, but he said,
yeah, there is. The men that were watching the Iron Gate and were supposed to keep up constant message with us so we could tell them if we would need them to open up, they were found dead. Poisoned by an unknown assailant. Whoever did it, they didn't want us retreating behind the wall, they wanted us to die outside of it. For a time I thought it was a part of Aberon's grand plan too, but it didn't fit into how he did everything else, perhaps an associate of his though. Anyways, it had to be someone from within our own kingdom, someone high up. I eventually caught onto the trail of a former council member named Eli Troth. But when I went to confront Eli, he was already dead. Poisoned by the same substance that killed the men at the Iron Gate. I never did find the real culprit. Even when I brought back Eli's corpse to the capital, none of our maesters or herbalist or anyone could identify the mysterious poison.
Thrain stopped his story after that, nothing more to say.
I have a question for you,
Kurth said. Thrain glanced back to him and asked,
yeah, and what's that? These men you say were poisoned, were their eyes black as coal when ye found them dead?
Thrain stopped and looked at Kurth.
Yes, how did you know that? We didn't tell anyone about it that didn't need to know.
His suspicion was evident.
The poison was called black site. It's found only in a special cavern in the Keflon mountain range,
Kurth said.
I've been there before, traveling with some pals one day, when exposed to it. The stuff makes your eyes go black and you turn blind for a few hours. The longer your exposure, the longer your blindness lasts. But, according to my Magi pal, if you can capture the black site essence in its pure form, and work some sorta of magic into it, it becomes a poison more lethal than anything. I don't know what magic goes into it, but I do know that it's invisible when dark out and can be introduced to your body through any means, by touching your bare skin, by you breathing it, you name it.
Thrain calmed down, his suspicion gone now.
Your magister friend who told you all this, he have a name by chance?
Thrain asked.
Just said his name was Finur, an odd but fun elder fella. He lives in Dorgal though, so I doubt ye ever seen him.
Kurth said. They continued on again after that in silence for a short time until Adeline said,
You know what I don't understand from your story, Thrain?
Thrain groaned and asked,
Okay, you too I guess, what? What turned you around to being such a kind man? You said you were a troublemaker and only cared for fighting, so how did the young punk like that turn into the man who prays for his enemies after they fall?
Thrain smirked and said,
Oh, that young punk is still there, just buried deep down for when he's needed. But the one who changed me for the better, helped me become the man my father knew I could be, was my arranged wife Jezebel. It took time, but she was patient, and relentless. And I wanted to be something more for her sake, more than just the battle-crazed barbarian I was. It's for her sake I went so far and continued being a Lord Commander, even when I didn't think I could live up to my father's reputation. She's my reason in my life.
The higher the group climbed, the harder it became to find the next stairs leading up. It was never really difficult but always tedious. Though most of the floors were the same, the soft spongy ground and all the violet trees, they still managed to be laid out a little different than the one before. It was the only way they knew for certain they were not walking in circles. Still, they had yet to encounter any other inhabitants or demons along the way, which seemed to be a good sign, for now. Slowly they began losing track of how many days they were climbing the tower. Their only indication of how long it had been was the gradual decrease of their food rations.
Who would have guessed that it would be so hard to tell the time when you can't ever see the sun, or moon?
Rugal said casually as they ascended more stairs.
Who would guess I wouldn't have gone mad after so long of being inside?
Adeline added in.
Well, this place sort of doesn't feel like you're inside, or like you're outside either. Anyone else get that same feeling? I be getting that same feeling too,
Kurth said.
Weird, but I don't mind it.
While everyone started talking about how it felt to be inside the tower for so long and not completely miss the outside, Thrain was listening keenly onto a very subtle noise he heard. It was indefinable, but he knew that there was something. It wasn't until they reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the next floor he understood what he was hearing. The howling sounds of numerous wolves coming from the dark area to the right stopped everyone's conversation and turned their heads to it. None of them could see through the darkness, but they could all hear the howl. This particular floor appeared much smaller than the others, since the only illuminated area was a straight path to wall just 20 yards beyond the stairs. Up higher in the wall was an illuminated tunnel of some sort. Countless of hand-sized holes burrowed into the wall below the tunnel seemed to lead a climbing trail up to it. While most everyone stared ahead at the tunnel in the wall, Adeline looked over into the darkness, where the sounds of the howling wolves were coming from.
Those wolves sound, I don't know, unnatural to anyone else?
She asked.
You be onto something there, methinks,
Kurth said. He then grabbed his massive double-edged axe that was hung around his back and advanced towards the dark area from where the wolves were howling.
And good old Kurth is going to find out just why that is. Be right back.
Kurth then disappeared off into the darkness despite everyone's protests for him to wait.
Kurth,
Adeline called out as the howling wolves continued on. No answer. She tried again, only louder.
Kurth, can you hear me?
They waited a full minute, but when he still didn't answer, Thrain unsheathed his sword and stepped into the dark veil. He was walking blindly through the darkness, his sword held out in front of him in preparation, following the howl of the wolves. Their howling got louder and louder until Thrain found he should be right on top of them by now, given how close their howls were. Ever cautious, he took those final steps. Filled with anticipation, he emerged from the darkness and into the light. Kurth stood in the bright area of yellow light, looking annoyed. Beyond him another set of stairs.
Where were you? I've been calling for all of you to be common, ain't no wolves here. Just the Tau playin' tricks on us.
Kurth said. Thrain sighed with relief and sheathed his sword.
No, we couldn't hear you at all, only the call of the fake wolves.
he said.
Stay here, I'm going to grab the others.
He then rushed off back into the darkness to grab the others. Going through the dark again, without the wolf's call to guide him, was a little disorienting, but he made it through where the others were waiting for him with anticipation.
Kurth is on the other side of this vale just fine, there were no wolves.
Thrain said.
There is also a set of stairs over there, I think that whatever is up in that path through the wall may just be a trap, or at the very least the wrong path. That makes sense,
Adeline said.
The fake wolf howls in the dark must be part of a test on this floor, so how do we proceed through this dark veil? From how long you were gone it must be thick. Just follow the wolf's howling, that's what led me out in the open to Kurth and the other stairs.
Thrain then held his hand out.
And everyone join hands, I don't want anyone getting lost through there.
Adeline took his hand and held out hers for Lessa as everyone followed in with them. Thrain led them through the dark as he followed the howling wolves again. When Kurth saw them emerge from the darkness, all holding hands in a line, he said mockingly,
"Aw, now look at you. You're like the wee munchkins in a group when them all gets scared."
Everyone let go of each other's hand at Kurth's mocking comment, and Thrain took the lead again, heading up the stairs. Down deep in the catacombs, Lord Tarbeck and Grand Magister Cambron met again, to speak in private. As before, the only light down there was supplied by Cambron's magic.
"Thrain and the others are gone, how should we proceed now?"
Cambron asked.
"Not too quickly but not too slow either,"
Tarbeck answered.
"I have gotten word from King Jeremiah that Aladern has called on them for an alliance. So long as Jeremiah plays his part right, we will be able to cross Aladern off the list of troubles." "And how do we do that?" "Simple, by telling King Alden the truth, that if Aladern and Cantor were to unite against us, especially now, then they would crush us. After King Jeremiah provokes Aberon, then that barbarian will be more desperate than ever for better fortunes. And Alden will then invite him here and offer him terms of an alliance and grant him entry into the tower, along with some of his strongest men." "And you think this is a good idea, letting someone like Aberon into our walls with his best men? He could turn around and weaken our defenses greatly from the inside to finish what he started years ago,"
Cambron said, making no attempt to conceal his worries.
"It is a large risk, I will admit, but we have to take it. Remember, this isn't for us, it's for our people." "Our people?"
Cambron asked, turning cynical in an instant.
"This is for the good of my people. You have no idea what it's like to be born a magister in this world. Just because of the potential you have, they take you from your home and families and force you into the military."
Cambron's light orb turned red and began heating up the crypts as his anger grew out of control. Tarbeck held up his hands and said,
"Easy there, my friend, you're right, I don't know what that is like, but it is not just the magister whose world we're trying to improve, it's everyone's."
Cambron took in steady deep breaths to calm himself down, his orb returning to a dim yellow as the crypts cooled down again.
"You're right, I am sorry. These are stressful times for everyone, us most of all, you just have to hold it together for a little while longer. I know you can do it." "How long do you think you will need to convince Alden to let Aberon and his men into our walls?" "Not too long, but as I said before, this is a delicate process, and not one I can rush." "Alright then, while you work on him, I will begin the preparations to aid Cantor. We don't want our friends beyond the wall to fail before they can even try."
Chapter 10 King Aberon, Chapter 1 Aberon sat in his high chair waiting for the young squire of Sir Jaime Petroff. The boy's name was Peter, if Aberon remembered correctly. Peter was a little older than Anagil, but with about as much experience as him, though too. It was an ordeal for Aberon to find someone equal to Anagil's talents and age, but he felt Peter would be a good opponent for his duel. The boy would not hold back, but wouldn't have years of experience under his belt like many of the kingdom's knights. Of course, Aberon hated the idea of losing his son to an old unused tradition such as this. If his boys were to die before him, then it should be on the battlefield against the true enemy, not against one of their own people. But Aberon knew Anagil would win this no matter what. He's a Tarok. He has generations of the kingdom's greatest warriors in his blood, and though he may not be like his brothers, he was a warrior of magic, not weapons. And magic, though mostly shunned in Aladern, was a weapon more potent than any steel. When the crowd finally began parting ways, Aberon knew it had to be for Peter, who was late for reasons beyond his comprehension, but he was here all the same. Aberon turned to look at the squire as he made his way through the crowd, and his jaw practically dropped. Instead of the squire boy coming out to the duel, it was Sir Darik Hasharin, one of Aladorn's greatest warriors of his generation. There was no way Anagil could beat Sir Darik. Even with his magic he didn't stand a chance. He had to stop the fight. As his son turned to him with a look of betrayal on his face, ARandom's heart sank a little. It was not him. But then who? He turned his head to the only other person who could have arranged Sir Darik to come today, his wife Bethany. She had a smug look on her face that confirmed for him this was her doing. Why ever did she hate her own son so much? It always eluded him. She said it was because he was a magi, not a warrior, but perhaps it was more. Maybe she believed that Anagil was not her child, and in fact some magister whore ARan fucked one night while he was gone at war. Bethany riddled with the idea before when she was drunk, but ARan didn't think she truly believed it herself. ARan then moved to stop the duel, getting ready to announce the postponement until Anagil's proper opponent was found, but then he saw his son's face. Watched as he steadily drew breath in and out, calming himself, then opened his eyes, and the determination and fierceness behind those sapphire gems. He knew his opponent and still was determined to continue, and to win. He believed in himself. Seeing his son's composure, ARan had a change of heart. Even against such a great adversary he stood strong and willing. No Tarok had ever backed away from a true fight, and Anagil wouldn't be the first. If he was going to reach his full potential, then it would be today, against this great adversary. How could ARan take that away from him? Still feeling reluctant about going through with the fight now, ARan rose up from his chair and began his speech. At the end he hesitated, at the final words, last thoughts of consideration, then he shouted, "Fight!" When the fight started, the two moved slowly, circling around, closing the gap between them, carefully staring the other down. ARan never seen Anagil like this before. He truly had changed in these latest moments. All he really needed was a strong push. As soon as Darik came into Anagil's range, he made his move. Thrusting his spear tip at Darik's chest and then snapping it up towards his neck so suddenly when he moved to avoid the thrust. ARan's jaw nearly dropped in surprise. Anagil never before displayed such skill or talent with weapons, but it just proved when pushed to the extreme he would adapt masterfully. However, Darik too moved with great speed, moving his head back just enough and catching the spear before it could fully slice open his throat. ARan saw the frustration and desperation on Anagil's face as he realized Darik had saved himself and his attack failed. He knew then it was over for Anagil. He was putting everything he had into that one move, and it failed. Still he didn't give up hope on his son just yet. He surprised everyone greatly with that attack just now, and he may have other tricks up his sleeve. The fight was one-sided after that and short-lived. Darik had knocked Anagil on his back for the last time and moved in for the kill. But as he moved in for the kill, Anagil shouted and thrust his hands out, shooting a brilliant stream of cobalt frost from them and freezing Sir Darik. He then rose up and smashed him to pieces with a strong hit. The crowd erupted with talk, and Bethany was so outraged she called for the guards to lock Anagil up. ARan was too surprised to stop them, or congratulate Anagil, or anything. The whole castle was talking about Anagil's duel and his imprisonment in the dungeon. One of the guards had the guile to call Anagil a freak at the small dinner feast later that night, and Torith, ARan's eldest son, got up from his chair and with a good punch knocked a few of the guards' teeth out. After that, Torith said to the other guard,
"Go and tell all the staff and guards and whoever the fuck else is talking about Anagil that if I hear them talking ill of my kin again, then I will do a whole lot worse than knocking a few teeth out of their jaw." "That was unnecessary,"
ARan said as Torith returned to his seat a few chairs down from him. Most the dining hall was quiet after that now and eating their foods in silent. When they finally picked up their conversations again, Torith responded,
"I think I should have done that hours ago."
ARan rose from his chair and said,
"Outside now."
Then he went outside, Torith following just behind him, and climbed all the way up to the dueling grounds where no one would hear them. Once there, ARan faced Torith and said,
"All right, here we are. Want to tell me what the hell that was all about back there?" "He was insulting our family, there is nothing more to it,"
Torith said.
"No, you always act out like that or in some way when you really need to speak with me, so here we are, speak."
Torith picked up some of the snow that had fallen onto the grounds that night and stared at it for a long moment before speaking.
"You know, Anagil might be the first ever magister in our family line, and his power is tremendous, even as a child. I heard of magisters who could resist weather, be struck by lightning and come out unscathed, but how many have complete immunity to the cold like Anagil? I remember seeing the power of the magisters when we were trying to invade Evercane. I remember how envious I was of that power, but still I was proud to be who I am. Even if I had magic in me, I'm a warrior at heart, just like you. I feel as if you might make a point here soon."
ARan asked.
"Do you remember when Anagil was 6 and we had taken him out to hunt for the first time?"
Torith asked.
"And then there was that mysterious blizzard that showed up in the middle of summer and we lost track of Anagil in it?" I remember, so what? So you always told us that family is the most important thing above all. And when we lost track of Inagil in that mysterious blizzard, that's all I could think about, is the well-being of our family. So despite your protests I went into that blizzard, poorly dressed as I ever was, and found him. Yes, you went back for him when I didn't want to risk your life, and then you returned with him, and he was happy as ever while you were half dead.
ARan said, becoming irritated.
Here is the part I didn't tell you about though. When I found him in that blizzard, he was half naked playing around in the snow and making sculptures of ice with his bare hands. The ice took whatever shape he wanted, and when he saw me, he jumped with joy saying, "Look brother, I made it snow. Isn't it marvelous?" And that's when I realized, that storm that came out of nowhere in the middle of summer, that was Inagil at the age of 6. I knew then he was magi potent, and in fact he could have kept that storm going for a long time and froze over half the kingdom if I hadn't found him. By then though I myself was half frozen, and when he saw this he stopped the storm, and I put his clothes back on him and carried him back, and said nothing of it to anyone until today. And you know what happens a year later, Inagil reveals his powers to us and everyone, Rathel, Dolmar, Isinger, Angrim, all my brothers and even mother, they all began to resent him. They all treated him differently since discovering his power, and you just turned your head and did nothing, while Bethany neglected him, and the others, Angrim especially, picked on him and beat him. I was the only one who didn't hate him for what he was, whether it was true hate or envy they despised. I couldn't always protect him, he never really needed it. For all the times they hit him and knocked him around, he stood strong, his body more resilient than any of ours. He could kill us all if he wanted, and there would be little we could do to stop him, but he never exercised his great power towards us. You want to know what the point of all this is? The point is Inagil's rotting away in our own dungeon because he used some his great power to survive a duel you forced him into against one of Aladern's greatest knights. I love my brother, I do, more than any of you, but he's seen nothing but resentment and hate from the rest of our family, and most the kingdom, just for being alive. And now he's punished further for his life by his own family. How much do you think he can take until he snaps? Sitting there with nothing to do all day but reflect on all the cruelty the others have shown him, and ample opportunity to exercise his powers, he might decide before too long to target those who wronged him. He doesn't belong in that cell, and he's too dangerous to be left alone to fester with his own demons.
With his speech done, Torith then left, descending the dark stairs, leaving ARan to think for himself in the cold snows outside. ARan knew Torith was right. Inagil had won his duel fairly using his own powers. He even put up a good fight against a tremendous adversary. He was a man now by all accords, but still he did not release his son. He wanted Bethany to do it, since she was the one who ordered his detainment. That very night, in his bedchambers, Bethany was getting ready for sleep when ARan came in doing the same. As he undressed he said, "Tomorrow I want you to release Inagil from his imprisonment." "You're the king, why don't you just order for his release?" Bethany asked, condescending. "I am ordering his release, from you. You are the one who locked him up there, so it should be you who releases him." Bethany let out a long and heavy sigh and crawled under the blankets and said, "Can we discuss this tomorrow? I think both of us have had far too long of a day and should focus on resting." ARan hated when Bethany got like this. Whenever something came up that she greatly disliked, she would almost go to extremes to avoid it. Typically, she would start up an argument and lead the conversation away from the main subject. Other times she would seduce ARan and make him forget about what they were speaking of not long before. Sooner or later ARan would get her to confront the subject in one manner or another, but it was always tedious. Right now though she was right, they both had a long and tiresome day, so it would be best to sleep for the time. He crawled into bed alongside her and slept. The next morning when he woke up, Bethany was gone, already up and active. At breakfast he saw some of his children missing too. "Where is your mother and your brothers?" ARan asked to no one in particular. "She went on the hunt with Thames, Beornid, and Angrim," Rathel said. "When are you going to release Inagil?" Torith asked, cutting into the conversation. "Why release him? He cheated in his name day duel and deserves to be punished," Rathel said. "And you should shut your mouth and learn your place, younger brother," Torith responded. Before things could escalate further, ARan slammed his fist on the table and yelled, "Enough the two of you, now I just woke up and my stomach is empty, so the last thing I wish to hear is your bickering." He then turned to the dining servant and said, "Go tell the cooks to cook me up some bacon, lots of it. And bring me a flagon of ale and some mutton from the kitchen." "Right away, sire," the servant said, then hastily left to fulfill his king's demand. ARan sighed, then turned his attention back to his children. "I ordered your mother to release him, but it seems she decided to instead go hunting."
So then give the order to the guards yourself,
Torith said.
Your mother ordered his detainment, it is only fitting that she orders his release. When she returns from the hunt, I assure you that will be the first thing she is doing. And when do you suppose she will return? It could be a fortnight, maybe more.
Torith countered.
If she is not back before the full moon, then I shall send word for her immediate return to set right her wrong. And I will hear no more of this now, do you hear me?
Torith was unhappy with his father's decision but said nothing more about it. And for a time things returned to normal around the castle, until the eclipse of the full moon. The dream of the tower came and all of Gallic Hall was in uproar over it. All the guards, the servants, everyone around was speaking about that wish, some even boldly talking about how they would wish for their own kingdom if they could climb to the top. ARan called for some of his guards to search out his wife in the forest and bring her home. The following day Bethany, Thames, Beornid, and Angrim returned from their hunt, which they cut short due to the mysterious dream they had. Upon their return home they soon learned that everyone in Gallic Hall had the same dream, maybe more than them. ARan called for a council meeting with his eldest son, Torith, his wife Bethany, and his council advisors. When the council was all together in the council room they all started up, arguing with one another on what the dream was about and what it meant. ARan was the only one quiet at the council meeting, even though he's the one who called it. Somehow he found it a little amusing listening to them argue about the dream when he knew what it meant. After letting everyone voice their own thoughts on the matter for several minutes, ARan raised his hands to call for silence. It took them all a minute to do so, but eventually they were all quiet, heads turned to face their king.
The answer is rather obvious, what that dream was about and the tower's existence and its location. Now it all makes sense, that tower is a creation from the gods. It is placed behind the walls of the second most difficult lands to invade, beside Dorgal, and it is a challenge issued by the gods themselves. They are saying that those of us who are worthy will find a way beyond the great Evercane wall and into that tower. And from there, only the true champion of the gods may obtain their wish. This is truly an act of providence. They gave us a chance to prove ourselves when I became king and tried to invade Evercane. But I failed, we failed, and the gods have decided to give all of us, not just myself, a chance of redemption in their eyes. We must set our sights now to the tower and devise a way to get there for our destiny. All of Aladern's destiny lies in there.
Moments after ARan's speech, one of the guards burst into the council room and said in a panic,
"Sire, it's your son, he's escaped from the dungeon and killed 2 of our guards in the process."
Torith gave ARan a look of apprehension as if saying,
"I warned you about this."
ARan sighed and got to his feet saying,
"Bethany, you come with me, everyone else you wait here and think of ways for us to get to that tower. That means you too, Torith."
ARan and Bethany followed the guard to the cell while he explained the situation.
When the morning crew of the guards came to relieve the night shift guards of their duty, they found the door sealed shut with ice from the inside. We had to get 4 men and a battering ram to open it.
The guard remained silent until they reached the dungeon.
Inside we saw this, and I rushed to come get you, sire.
All the guards stepped aside for the king and queen to see the frozen dungeon. The path was a solid layer of thick cobalt ice, the metal on the cells had a glaze of frost over them that sparkled in the sun peeking through the dismantled wall of Inagil's former cell. The 2 guards stationed there on night duty were like frozen sculptures, they hadn't even a clue what was happening when they froze over. To them it was just another cold night on duty. ARan walked past them to Inagil's cell, it was frozen over completely and in the center was a pedestal of ice with a parchment note sitting atop it. With a couple strong kicks from his heel, ARan smashed open the cell door and stepped inside, grabbing the parchment and reading it. It read,
"Father, I know you may be disappointed with me right now, and I know I may not be a man in your eyes just yet even after my duel. But I believe these powers of mine were a gift from the gods and I'm going to use them to prove myself worthy of your legacy. The other night I had a dream about that mysterious tower in the lands of our rival kingdom. In this dream, a challenge was issued for only one to be able to overcome that tower's trials and obtain the wish it's offering. I believe this is a sign from the gods, they have given me a true chance to prove myself not only to you, but to them as well. My destiny lies in that tower and in the sights of the gods I will reach the top and obtain that wish. When next we meet, Father, I will be a man."
Bethany walked into the cell and spoke in outrage.
"That monster, he slew our men and destroyed a portion of our dungeon. If you had not locked him away in the first place, this would not have happened.
ARan said, turning to face his wife.
You wouldn't even release him when I told you to. Were you ever planning on releasing him, or were you going to let him rot in here until I had to come give the order myself?
He asked.
We have more pressing concerns. We need to get a party and track him down. And then what? Bring him back here so he can escape again. No, he killed our men and cheated his way to victory in a sacred traditional duel. He needs to pay the ultimate price for this. He needs to be executed.
She turned to the guards now and said,
Lanra, Devon, begin forming a party of our best men. We're going to track my son down and bring him to justice for his crimes.
The guards moved and ARan shouted in rage,
Dismiss that order and remain where you are.
They stopped immediately and ARan turned his attention back to Bethany.
You have always hated him, haven't you?
Bethany was a little startled by his tone and answered him in a shaken-up voice, Excuse me.
Since the day you discovered he was Magi Potent you hated him, why? Now is not the time to discuss this. We have to stop him before he begins terrorizing the kingdom. How long do you think the people would stand behind you when your own son is out there? Don't change the subject. You're not weaseling your way out of this discussion,
ARan said, interrupting her.
Do you hate him because you don't believe he is yours? Do you think I broke our sacred wedding vows and fucked some magical girl one night while gone in the invasion? Do you believe perhaps this girl had my bastard and to cover it up I would swap the bastard with our seventh son so you wouldn't know? Where in the gods did you ever conceive such an idea as that? Unless perhaps my king, that's exactly what you had done. You know where I got that idea. It was from you. The night after discovering Inagil had those powers, you got more drunk than you ever had been before, and while our son was asleep you went into his room and tried to murder him. Thank the gods I had the notion to look for you there, because you would have done it too. And then after I pulled you away from him, that's what you told me. Said I swapped our real child for that bastard. So you tell me what has happened to you since Inagil's powers developed? You were once a noble warrior who proved herself more than worthy, my queen, and the greatest mother Aladern would ever have in its borders. So tell me, why are you so resentful of Inagil?
Bethany was shaking with emotions now, half of it rage. She finally let out her answer.
Because he is a freak. That boy is a stain on our family legacy. The gods should have never let him be born in the first place. And those powers of his, they will spin out of control and he will one day kill you with a lance of ice through your chest.
She placed her hand on ARan's cheek and said in a calmer tone,
I fear for you around him, my love. I fear for me, our other children and our kingdom when it comes to him.
ARan stepped back from her and shook his head in contempt.
Where do you think all his great powers come from? They're a gift from the gods, and in the sight of gods he has used his magic to overcome an adversary far greater than his normal skills. If they truly didn't think he was a man now, they would have struck him down with lightning and rocks atop those dueling grounds for winning his duel to manhood that day. But the fact that he still stands today and is on his way to the tower right now is all because the gods will it to so. I cannot allow you to defy their will and target our son. What becomes of him is for the gods to decide now. They have given him his path and we have set him down it now.